What's going on, guys? Today we're going to be going over Bob McKenzie's final draft rankings for the 2022 NHL draft. So if that sounds good to you guys, do be sure to stick around to the end of the video to see my entire reaction to what he has to say about these draft picks. And I will say I have done my best to avoid spoilers for myself, but I do know a few things about these draft rankings already. But that being said, let's just get right into it. It's actually a little bit annoying here because he just has a giant paragraphs about his top two picks instead of having them in the list. But you guys probably know this already. He has Uri Slavkovsky first overall, and of course that means he has Shane Wright second overall. So I'm not going to spend too much time reading what he has to say about these players, but I'll just say this. This is kind of a hot take, to be honest, but I respect Bob McKenzie's opinion a lot, and he is a guy who I think has a very good idea of what NHL teams are thinking. So I think that his draft rankings, let me put it this way, he has his finger on the pulse of what NHL teams are thinking about these players. So if he has Slavkovsky first overall, I never thought I would be saying this, but there is a good chance that Slavkovsky will actually go first overall. Now, when it comes to first overall picks in general, there is a bit of pressure there on the teams drafting first overall to draft the guy who most people and most fans of that team are going to be screaming at you to draft, right? And in this draft class, that is Shane Wright, because all year long it's been Shane Wright, Shane Wright, Shane Wright. Everybody's talking about Shane Wright. He is the consensus first overall pick. And Montreal won the draft lottery. He's going to Montreal. Great, awesome. It'll be interesting to see what actually happens because there have been a little bit of mumblings, I guess, about Slavkovsky potentially going first overall in the last couple days. I didn't really buy any of that until this, because that's how much I respect McKenzie's opinion. And yeah, it'll be really interesting to see. I think this changes my expectations of how the draft is actually going to play out a little bit. And at this point, I probably just would not put money on who is going to go first overall. I would have put money on Shane Wright pretty much all year. But now there is a little bit of doubt in my mind. Okay, so third overall, then he has Logan Cooley. So I actually have Logan Cooley third as well. So a little bit less drama there, I guess. And yeah, so overall, our top threes are actually the same in terms of the players, not the rankings, because I have Wright, Slavkovsky, Cooley. Is that right? Yeah, Wright, Slavkovsky, Cooley. So we agree on Cooley, and yeah, that's about it there. 4, he has Simon Nemec. So personally, I like Juracek more. He is my top ranked defenseman in the draft, but I don't really have a problem with Nemec being your top ranked defenseman. The upside is definitely there for that. 5, he has Cutter Gauthier. So that is kind of interesting. Elite prospects, I'm pretty sure, had Frank Nazar at 5. And personally, I like Nazar way more than Gauthier. Gauthier is a good, 200-foot player who I think will play a solid role in the NHL, but I don't think he really has that much upside. So drafting a player like that, 5th overall, kind of questionable to me. I'm sure he will get taken pretty high, though, probably higher than I have him ranked, because I'm pretty sure he's not even in my top 10. But yeah, Gauthier at 5, I don't really like it, to be honest. 6, he has Juracek, so just a couple spots after Nemec. That's pretty reasonable. Like I said earlier, I like Juracek more than Nemec, but Juracek at 6 is perfectly fine. Now at 7, he has Joachim Kamel, And let's see what he has to say about him. Some scouts view him as a legit threat to crack the top 5. Yeah, that's probably true. He ranged from high as 4 to as low as 14 in our survey. One suggests he's a candidate to develop into the best player in the entire draft because of his offensive ceiling. Projects as a top 6 NHL forward. Yeah, that's pretty much accurate. I do think Kemel has top 6 upside. Could be a good goal scorer in the NHL as well. I'm not sold on his ability to drive offense on his own. So he might be a guy that you have to staple to like better players in order to be to be the most effective player he can be. But as long as you have those players, then that's not a problem. At 8, he has Jonathan Lekkerimäki, which is pretty interesting because I also have these guys ranked back to back, or at least I did. I think that might actually change my final rankings a little bit. But I've had these guys back to back for most of the year, and a lot of people that I've seen have actually had these guys back to back, which is pretty interesting. I do think they are somewhat similar players. Lekkerimäki, a little bit of shot selection problems with these guys, more so with Kemel, though. I think if I'm remembering that correctly, I could be getting these guys confused a little bit. But they both kind of have that problem to an extent. Lekkerimäki, though, I think is a bit more well-rounded, so I'm a little surprised to see him one spot below Kemel. But again, having him back-to-back, you're kind of splitting hairs. Although when it comes to top 10 picks, can be pretty important sometimes. But yeah, that's those two guys. Now at 9, we have Matt Savoy. And I have Savoy at 5. So I've gone back and forth on Savoy all season. I was really high on him at the beginning of the season and for a lot of the season. Then I kind of got a little bit more pessimistic about him with regards to just his size, which I think he needs to get stronger at he needs to get stronger in general, but needs to get better at resisting pressure and evading pressure. But then as the season went on, my philosophy kind of changed a little bit, and now I have him bumped back up a little bit. So I understand why Savoy is ranked 9. I think in terms of upside, he is easily top 5, and that's why I have him that high. But yeah, there is risk with Savoy. Okay, at 10 we have Marco Kasper, and this is what I say about Kasper. And wow, he has a lot to say about Kasper. Wait, oh, he only has the top. Is this the only top 10? Okay, you know what, we'll get to that later. I will say this. I am glad that this is not Connor Geeky in this spot, because if you've watched some of my other videos, you might know I'm really not a fan of Connor Geeky. Now, Kasper 10th overall to me is also still way too high for him, but I can see it. He is a very overall effective hockey player. I think his upside is pretty limited. I see him as a third line center most likely. I think of any forward position that he will end up playing the most time in, I think it'll probably be a third line center somewhere. And that is good. Drafting a third line center is a good thing. But 10th overall, generally speaking, you kind of want to get players with more upside in the top 10. But that's just my philosophy. Okay, so we do have the rest of his rankings here. Actually, just he doesn't have little written blurbs about each of these players, but that's fine for what I need in this video. And yeah, at 11, he has Kevin Korchinski. So I'm pretty sure that makes him his third highest ranked defenseman. It does. That is pretty similar to where I've had him pretty much the whole season. I will admit he's another guy that is falling a little bit for me in my final rankings. He is no longer my third highest ranked defenseman, but I definitely see why he's ranked that high. Pavel Mintyukov, he has at 12, and that is also pretty close to where I have him. Now, I might actually have Mintyukov higher than Korchinski in my final rankings. If I do, it'll probably be pretty close. I just kind of like Mintyukov's upside more. I think they'll both be solid offensive guys in the NHL, but I think if Mintyukov is a little bit more risky, but if he hits, I think he could develop into a more well-rounded defenseman, as well as having that offensive upside. Korchinski, to me, just has some decision-making problems at times. Now, at 13, this is where we have Connor Geekie, and to me, that is still way too high for Geekie. I just don't really like him that much. I thought younger players played better than he did on his team this year, and he was on a very, very good team, so that might have inflated his stats a little bit as well. I just think his skating is a big issue for me, and that's the main problem I have with him. He is big, so skating is slightly less important, I would say, for larger players, especially forwards. But overall, I still think skating is arguably the most important fundamental skill any player can have. So it kind of takes a special type of player to not be a great skater, but still be very, very effective players. Think of guys like Joe Pavelski and Jason Robertson. Do I see Connor Geekie turning into the next Jason Robertson? No, I don't. So, and even then, Jason Robertson was drafted 38th overall. So I don't see Geeky being worth a top 16 pick. Now at 14, he has Daniil Yurov, and that is reasonable for Yurov. I think he is a really, I guess he's kind of like a Swiss Army knife type player to me. I feel like he's a guy who, if he develops correctly, can play pretty much any position that you put him at in the NHL. I mean, obviously he's a winger, so he's not going to be playing like defense or anything, but he can play in any situation in a game. He can play on the power play, he can play on the penalty kill. You could throw him in the top six, and I think he'll be fine. You could put him in the bottom six, and he'll be fine, and he'll still produce a bit offensively, especially in like a third line scoring role. So really solid prospect. I think doesn't have any one skill that seriously blows me away, but that doesn't really worry me too much. And 14 might be a little bit high on him for me, but, it's reasonable. At 15, he has Frank Nazar. Nazar is just pure upside and speed. He's a really fun player to watch. And I think the style of game that Nazar plays is more and more the style of game that NHL teams are starting to play, especially the really good ones, particularly teams like the Colorado Avalanche, who you may or may not have noticed just won the Stanley Cup. So, for those reasons, I think Nazar will be a very effective player in the NHL. I think he has a lot of upside. It's really a question, to me, it's more of a question of whether or not he will play a top line role. He does need to work on his defense. His defense is not very good, but I do think even if his defensive game doesn't develop very well, there is space for a guy with the amount of offensive talent that he has, assuming it continues to develop and translates to the NHL. I think there's space for a guy like that, at least one guy like that in every team. Maybe you don't play him on the penalty kill, you give him sheltered minutes 5-on-5, especially late in games if you're trying to protect a lead, but he's a guy that can potentially score a lot, and that has a ton of value, in my opinion, and he's fast. Okay, at 16, we have Brad Lambert. I believe this is the lowest I've seen Lambert on any list. Still in the first half of the first round. And if you guys have seen my other videos, you will know that I'm a big believer in Brad Lambert, but he is admittedly falling on my list a little bit for my final rankings. I have him at 8 though, so he's still 8 spots higher for me. And given some of the guys that are between 8 and 16 on McKenzie's list, that is kind of a pretty big difference. At 17, he has Jimmy Snuggerud, and this is one that I kind of disagree with. I think he was relatively high on one of the other rankings I looked at already. It might have been Elite Prospects. I don't remember. But yeah, Snuggerud at 17, I just don't think the upside is there. Now, generally speaking, in this draft, I think there isn't a ton of high-end skill and upside. Like, I don't think this draft class is going to produce a ton of top six forwards or top six players and then like top pair defensemen. I see it producing more of a bunch of role players, middle six guys. Geez, middle six guys, bottom six guys that are just effective hockey players. And Snuggerud to me is one of those types of guys. He is a decent one, he's okay, he's good, but 17 is just a bit high considering his upside. Now at 18, he has Yuri Kulik, and this is what I can get behind. I don't think he has a ton of upside either, but to me, Kulik plays a much better all around game. I mean, not much better, but I have a lot more faith in Kulik's ability to turn into like another Swiss Army knife type guy, kind of like Daniil Yurov. A bit less skill. I don't think he's going to score as many points as a guy like Yurov, but Kulik is a guy that can play a lot of positions. He's not a center, which does hurt him a bit, I guess, which maybe justifies his rankings here. Although, that being said, I'm pretty sure I have him ranked lower than this as well, or I will have him ranked lower than this in my final rankings. But generally speaking, in this range, I don't have a big problem with that, especially considering once you get out of the first half of the first round in this draft class, the difference between a guy you draft at 19 and a guy you draft at 29 might not really be that big in the long run. Just because rankings on these guys are all over the place, I am reasonably confident that there will be some steals that go in the late first round, second round, maybe even later than that. And there'll be guys in the first round that just kind of have decent careers, but based off of what fans are going to be expecting out of them, could be a little bit disappointing. And yeah, so 18 for Kulik, I guess, is fine. Let's see. Now, at 19, he has Ivan Miroshnichenko. Now, that is interesting. I have Miroshnichenko a bit higher on my list simply because I think he has a lot of upside. He missed most of the season with his cancer diagnosis and treatment, but he's in remission now, and he has been cleared to resume hockey activities. And what he showed at the very beginning of the season, I think, was really high level stuff. I think he's a guy that is probably admittedly likely to go somewhere in this range, like mid to late first round. But when you're drafting him, you're not necessarily getting a guy with a safe floor who can play a very solid 200-foot game. A guy like Snuggerud or Kulik, or Marco Casper even. You're kind of swinging on a guy with upside, and that is kind of my draft philosophy in general. So, I don't hate Miroshnichenko at 19. I would have him ranked a bit higher, but if I was drafting him 19th, I would be very happy with that. At 20, Bob has Isaac Howard, and that is very similar to where I have him ranked, and he's another guy with a lot of upside. You are swinging on him. His defensive game is a bit non-existent, but he's another guy who's fast, has a good shot, and can score a lot of points. At least in the NDTP, I thought he was really good. Will his game translate to the NHL level? I don't know. He's a guy I think is going to have to develop his defensive game a little bit more than a guy like Nazar, because I don't think he'll be able to make it on his offense alone as much, but he still has upside, so he's another high upside swing, and 20 is a good spot for him. Okay, at 21 and 22, we have Ogren and Ostlund. So that's pretty interesting because I see these guys as relatively different style players. Ogren is a guy who's a bit safer, can play a well-rounded game, and can still score. Ostlund is more of a high-octane, high-motor guy who can potentially score a lot, potentially have a lot of upside. I think he has higher upside than Ogren. Or I should say his ceiling at least is higher than Ogren's, which is generally what I mean when I'm referring to upside. And yeah, a lot of people have Ogren ranked a lot higher than Ostland. Gravity, I believe, had Ostland ranked a lot higher than Ogren, so that's kind of interesting. There's a bit of a variation on these two guys. To me, I don't know. I kind of like Ostland more. Either way, they're both a bit low for me. Ogren more so than Ostland, even though I just said I like Ostland more. Like I said, he is, or I don't believe I actually mentioned this yet or not, but Ostland is a bit riskier. And that is generally the case with high upside swings. Those guys generally tend to have more risk. Uh, but yeah, I'd probably have Ogren a little bit higher than Ostland. I don't know. Depending on your exact philosophy, he could either be a lot higher or a lot lower. So that's those two players. 23, he has Owen Pickering. He's a defenseman I like. He's big and he's a good skater. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. Those are the foundations of a solid NHL defenseman. How much upside will we have that carries over to the NHL? That is a bit of a question. And for defensemen who are big and don't necessarily project to have a ton of offense at the NHL level, I think 23 is a very reasonable ranking for a guy like that. At 24, he has Denton Mateychuk, which is interesting. I've seen this guy in the top 10 for a lot of people, and I see it in terms of skill. He has really high. He's another high upside guy, but even more so than a lot of the other like high risk, high reward guys, I think Mateychuk is even more in that moldable player. He is super high risk, I think, and pretty high upside. I'm not. I don't know. I think the upside actually is quite high with Mateychuk if he hits. At times, he reminds me a bit of Cale Makar. I kind of hate to say that because people are going to get super hyped about that. But here's the thing. I don't see his game projecting to the NHL easily, or even maybe at all. If it does, though, Mateychuk could be very special. But the odds of that actually happening, I think, are pretty low. So you're either going to take a swing on a guy and miss or hit a home run, probably late in the first round, which I think is reasonable. So I don't hate having him at 24. Or you're going to draft him and try to change the style of game he plays to make him more NHL projectable and have him play a more reasonable, mellowed out role in the NHL. Personally, I would rather just take the home run, grand slam swing on him because that's kind of who he is, and that's probably who he wants to be. Uh, and yeah, so it's a bit tough. He's a tough read, but having him at 24, if you're a team that has recently had a lot of success, then draft him. If you're a team that has not had success recently and you're trying to build a solid core, probably a guy you want to avoid. At 25, Bob has Ryan Chesley, and I'll actually talk about 26 as well, and Leon Bichel. I'll talk about these two guys together. They're both guys that I think don't have a ton of offensive upside. Now, Bichel is huge, and he skates very well. I'm a little bit surprised he's ranked this low, to be honest. Chesley is a guy who is not huge. He's reasonably sized. He's listed here at 6'1.5". But he is also 201 pounds. That's pretty solid. But I don't think he will score a lot at the NHL level. He does have a bit more offensive upside than Bichel, I think, and a lot of other defensemen who are likely to go in this range. I would have his offensive potential, I like a tick less than Owen Pickering. A couple of ticks more than a guy like Bichel. And yeah, so Chesley's not a guy I really like. Bichel's a guy I haven't seen a lot of, but he is a guy that I do like because of his size and his skating. Either way, having these guys ranked in this range is, again, pretty reasonable. At 27, he has Rutger McGroarty. I have him at 33. Or do I have him at 30? I either have him at 32 or 33. He's another role player at the NHL level, I think. A guy who can play a solid 200-foot game, score a little bit, maybe a third liner, maybe a second liner if you get a little bit lucky. Nathan Goucher at 28 is a guy similar role. He is a center, so that helps him out a little bit. I don't think Goucher has as much offensive upside as a lot of people do, which so having him ranked 28, it does seem a little bit low for him, but at the same time, yeah, I think I have him like mid to high 20s. But yeah, generally speaking, at this point in the draft, I don't think you're getting any major game changers. At 29, he has Luca Del Belbo Luz, who's a guy that admittedly I haven't seen that much this season, so I'm not going to comment too much on him. At 30, he has Philip Meshar, who is a guy that I like a lot. He's another guy that I think could be potentially more of a defensive specialist in the NHL. I believe I compared him to Andrew Cogliano. That might have been a different player that I compared to Cogliano, but either way, he can kind of be that type of player as well. And that is generally speaking the type of player that you're probably going to be drafting this late in the first round in most drafts. So that's not bad. At 31, he has Sam Renzel, who's a player that I have not seen at all this year, so I can't comment on him. And finally, at 32, he has Tristan Luneau. Now, Luneau is a guy that I don't really like that much. He's like a second rounder for me. There are several defensemen that I like a lot more that he doesn't have in his first round. Guys like Lane Hudson and Christian Kyrou are guys that could easily at least be at 32 over Luneau. So that's pretty much how I feel about that. I'm not going to go too much into his rankings after 32 because this is really meant to just be reacting to his first round. But I will be going over, well, I will be scanning, I guess, the rest of his lists and pointing out some interesting placements, with the first being, of course, Jagger Firkus. I love Jagger Firkus. 34 is, quite frankly, kind of insulting for the Firkus Circus. He's way too good to go in the second round. I have him 11th in my final rankings. He has the best shot in the draft. He is a pretty good skater. He is a good skater. He's quite mobile. His off the puck offense is also improved as the season's gone along. His playmaking has improved as the season gone along. I just really see him as a really solid all-around prospect who also happens to be one of the best goal scorers in this draft. So 34 is just way too low on him, in my opinion. That might be related to his size. Maybe it's his defensive game. I don't know. But that's just way too low. Maverick Lamrou at 44, that's way too high. I don't see him being a very good NHL player. He probably will play in the NHL, just I don't think he will be a very good one. Lane Hudson at 40, that's actually pretty reasonable. I think I have him in my first round. We'll see once I get there. Gleb Trikazov at 57, that is hilariously low on Trikazov, I think. I kind of understand it because of his lack of defense, but the upside with Trikazov is way too high to be going that late in the draft. Tyler Brennan at 62 is interesting. I don't really do goalies, but that seems pretty high for him. 63 for Sakura, that seems quite low. Mats Lindgren at 64, that also seems pretty low for him. I don't love Mats Lindgren, but I mean, I don't know. He's more of like a mid second rounder, I guess, which at this point in the draft, honestly, isn't a huge difference, but that does seem pretty low. Isaiah George at 69, that's fine, actually. Christian Kyrou at 78, that's way too low for Christian Kyrou for me. He is way too skilled to be that low. Yeah. Oh, here we go. Jeez. Vladimir Grudinin. I totally forgot about this guy. Grudinin at 88 is actually just awful. I suspect that ranking has a lot to do with the fact that he's Russian, but I have him 10th. Now, that is maybe a bit of a hot take. I do believe I have him ranked quite a bit higher than a lot of other people do, but Grudinin is the smoothest skating defenseman in the draft class, in my opinion. He is the most mobile. He's a good puck carrier, and those reasons alone should have him ranked way higher than 88 at the very least, if not in the first round. But yeah, that I didn't think there would be a pick that I would disagree with worse than Firkus at 34, but Grudinin at 88. That's a yikes for me, Bob. Okay, that will be it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you did like it, please do give it a like. That really helps me out. And if you want to stick around for a while, watch another video, I will put one right up screen up here. It'll be my reaction video to another rankings list, probably Elite Prospects one, I believe. I'll put that one right up here.